Hey everyone, welcome to Sociastrology. Today I wanted to look at the ongoing full moon in Taurus that is culminating on the 15th of November. It's setting us up in a very interesting way for the coming months. So I wanted to look at this full moon within that context of the coming months, the coming years, looking forward from this point here. So we will get into that in just a moment. But if you are new here, please do consider subscribing, sticking around for future videos. We do big transits like this on a personal level. We also get into political, cultural, social astrology here as well. So if that sounds like it is of interest to you, then yes, please do consider subscribing. And if you don't mind hitting the thumbs up button, I would greatly appreciate that. It helps to kind of boost this video within the context of the YouTube algorithm, so it gets shared with other people and so on and so forth. So I very much appreciate that if you are able to do that. And yeah, I think without any further ado, let's get into it. So I have here a chart for the full moon that is, again, it's on November 15th. East Coast time, it's at 4:28 p.m. And of course, what stands out to us most about this full moon is that we have it occurring with the moon exactly conjunct to Algol here. I'm getting ahead of myself here. It's exactly conjunct to Uranus here, and the two of these together are exactly conjunct the fixed star of Algol. So this is quite significant, especially considering the fact that Uranus has been playing into our politics. I would say perhaps especially within the US, although really it's been playing out in our politics, definitely on a global level for quite a while. In part, the entire anti-incumbency kind of backlash that most countries have been experiencing recently, with the exception of Mexico, where the ruling party was able to respond to people's needs well enough such that they weren't thrown out of office and didn't lose a bunch of votes like occurred pretty much everywhere else in the world. Um, this has definitely been pushing people to a level of financial and otherwise not quite political, but just economic discomfort with the status quo here with Uranus in Taurus. So that is quite significant. On a personal level, this is very likely to bring up relatively surprising events, of course, but additionally, probably around issues and questions of scapegoating with Algol here, and additionally, a desire to kind of break free from certain confines or certain constraints throughout this period of time, as well as this Uranus is getting triggered pretty strongly by a full moon here. So that is part of that. I did want to go into specifically this full moon and what we can expect from it, kind of on a high level, and then go into some of what it's playing into, and then how all of these energies are going to be unfolding and playing out in the coming months. So let's talk about this full moon a little bit more now. So some of the major questions that we're going to be experiencing with this full moon coming up are going to be around our own personal values. This is playing out, of course, in Taurus, which has a lot to do with values, but this is becoming a little bit more even broader or more along the lines of ideological values when Uranus is involved in these big questions here. So certainly the way that we view the world, the way that we are aligned and inclined politically is going to be having a really strong effect on how we see our values playing out throughout this period of time, whether there is hope along those lines, whether there's fear along those lines. And really what this is asking us to do, somewhat regardless of where we stand with all of that is check in with, what are your values? What are your standards? Do they match those around you? Are you clear on your expectations with regard to yourself and with others? Do you know where your boundaries are within, pardon the context of relationships as well? Additionally, with this authenticity, being very real with yourself about these things is going to be very important throughout this period of time as well. And then as we go forward, the way that I see this full moon playing out is it's bringing up currently and kind of acutely some of the major topics and questions and difficulties, challenges, kind of growth vectors of the coming months and years are all wrapped up within this full moon quite concisely, such that, again, I think that this period of time, before things really start to unfold in much clearer ways, to check in, to make sure that we are quite aware of what's important to us, what we feel we ought to be dealing with, what we feel we ought to be prioritizing, what genuinely makes us happy and not just what makes us stable. All of these questions coming up very strongly right now in order to bring us not necessarily to a place of action around it currently, but to a place of clarity and awareness around that, such that we'll be able to take the action that we need as we're prompted to in the coming months and years. So this isn't so much an action-oriented full moon here. It's more along the lines of paying attention to what's coming up for us during this period of time. So how are things making us feel? What seems to be arising as a matter with which we have to deal? What do we need to address? What seems to be an area or a point within our lives that requires attention, requires adjustment, requires addressing, so that we can do that in order to enable ourselves to take the action that we need as the opportunity arises in the coming months and years. So that's kind of on a broad view how I see this playing out. But again, big questions around values. Additionally, if you are feeling at all, again, with this Uranus here bringing up some questions around ideology, if you are feeling a little bit out of place or underrepresented in terms of your own ideology, your own view of the world, your own values within the world, how you would like to see things play out, are there ways that you can get more involved in order to see that happen? Additionally, are you investing some level of your energy too heavily into areas of life where there's just not really any payoff? So, for instance, it's not really bringing you joy. It's not really bringing you any more security. There doesn't seem to really be much expectation of that coming down the line. And yet, for some reason, maybe you feel a level of obligation to that for some reason. And of course, there can be things that quote unquote don't pay off for us, but they're still somewhat fulfilling because we can understand, well, I'm able to contribute to X, Y, and Z in such a way that makes me at least feel good about the fact that I'm able to help something out. But if that's not something that is playing out and you're putting some energy into something along these lines where it doesn't really seem like it's doing you any good, then definitely try to consider taking any urges that you have around this time now to divest from that, to pull your energy back from that, try and take those pretty seriously because a lot of what we're dealing with during this period of time is bringing up some really useful questions around sustainability. And I don't just mean financially, I also mean along the lines of, is this something that you can practically expect for yourself to continue to put a lot of energy into? If it's something that makes you uncomfortable and there's not a lot of payoff to it, then no, that's probably something that you're going to want to let go of so that you can reprioritize where your energy is going. So additionally, throughout this period of time, there seems to be the time and the impetus to look at these things, to actively take a moment out to try to imagine, how do I want to reprioritize things over the coming months? What are my big goals in the coming years? And how can I reorient where I'm putting my time and my energy, my effort, possibly even my money, in order to focus in much more narrowly, specifically on that, and then eliminate any additional distractions, which might be a bit of an energy leak for you, or a finance leak, or a time leak, what is taking from you and not really giving back. I think taking some time out to actively ask yourself that question and try to address it will be very, very useful during this time. Now, additionally, there's not really any applying aspects that Venus is making right now. So the reason that I mentioned that is because this full moon in and of itself is ruled by Venus. It's in Taurus, so it's ruled by this Venus here. And the next aspect that it will make is a very lovely sextile to Saturn. And the reason that that is especially nice is that Venus is in the sign of Saturn's domicile in Capricorn, and Saturn is in the sign of Venus's exaltation in Pisces here. So it'll be a mutual reception with dignity, and these two should, to put it very succinctly, they should be getting along really well, Venus and Saturn, in the coming days. Now, right around the time of this full moon, however, it's not quite making that aspect yet. And it's just moving off of the square with Neptune. So again, I think specifically around the time when I'm publishing this video and through the weekend here, it'll be really useful to try to actively take some time out to just do some thinking, and really oriented around questions of your values, your finances, your comfort, sustainability, and all of that going forward. Now, additionally, we have a financial orientation here as well, because this full moon is in Taurus. It's ruled by Venus, which is in Capricorn. And of course, that would be ruled by Saturn here. And what is definitely interesting here, I don't think that this is bad finances. I don't even think that the coming years are necessarily bad for finance. It's just that things are going to be pretty up in the air. There's going to be definite extremes in gains and losses, and probably everyone here with me will be somewhere in between. I mean, that's just kind of the nature of it, unless we have really over the top, overly concentrated investments. It's unlikely that things will necessarily completely bottom out. But there are some, of course, major questions that are coming up in the coming months around policy and how different policies are going to be impacting us financially. So I won't go super into that. I'm sure that everyone is quite aware of those kind of looming questions. And again, I would just say, with the financial orientation of this full moon, it might be very wise and I'm a little bit biased along these lines because this is something that I'm definitely preaching what I practice very, very, very strongly. I have, including my Saturn, some very strong placements in my in Capricorn. And so for me, it's always somehow a lot more satisfying to save than to spend. And I think that if that is something that people can get a little bit more into the habit of during this period of time, that for one thing, if things do go wonky, and this is always how I deal with uncertainty, again, with my background being in freelance and things like this, where things have been up in the air, there's always these ups and downs. You always have to plan around that. When dealing with uncertainty, that there are times when that can push you to both extremes where you're not taking care of your own needs. And yet, because you're stressed, you can also make impulsive purchases that kind of wind up just blowing through some money needlessly and inefficiently. And so, one thing I will say is that if you do try and utilize this time, especially going through the holidays, I think it's going to be best for a lot of people to not behave materialistically around the holidays this year. Let's assume that things go really well financially and everything's fine. The economy is, chugging along and everything's good. Well, then maybe you have reinforced for yourself a really solid skill set to have around a little bit of frugality, a little bit of reminding yourself about the insignificance of material things beyond just your basic security needs. But additionally, then you may have a little bit of a chunk of change to throw at something that you've kind of saved for yourself. That's why for me it's like it's always more satisfying to save than to spend, because if you have something saved, then there's always the possibility of spending it. And then additionally, if things go a little bit wonky, if there is a little bit of say an adjustment period or legitimate fallout economically in the coming time, then you have something to protect you throughout that period of time as well. So if, for instance, you work for an income and it's pretty consistent, but you're a little concerned about things, but you don't have that background of needing to always think about what if I don't make money a couple weeks from now? What if nothing comes in a few weeks from now, a few months from now? Constantly needing to plan for that. If you're not used to that, then that's a really wonderful skill set to have. It's something probably, in my opinion, the most valuable skill set that I have. So I would definitely recommend trying to build up on that throughout this period of time, remembering that, the things that you own also own you. They tend to stress you out the more things that you have. And where can you make cutbacks? Where do cutbacks not impact your quality of life? Because of course, that's really what we ultimately are after beyond our basic bottom of the pyramid needs of food and shelter and things like this, is just quality of life increases. So if you have certain subscriptions that, you know, maybe they're fun, but you don't really use them that much, then it would be a very nice practice to kind of make those cutbacks here and there, especially as the economy continues to go toward a kind of rentier situation where we are purchasing a lot of subscriptions and utilizing a great deal of our economy where there's specifically a middleman between each purchase and each thing. And as this middleman becomes much more technologically oriented rather than just the financial or banking sector oriented, and therefore becomes a little bit more expensive too, that I think is always going to be something that's going to be really good to utilize in in the coming years as we're transitioning into more of that kind of cloud capitalism system that we're going to be dealing with in the coming years too. So, maybe we shouldn't have laughed so hard when they said that you would own nothing and be happy. I'm sure a lot of us had the same experience as I did of like, nah. Yep. So, and of course not entirely. That is a hyperbole, but still, that is a lot along the lines of the economy that we'll probably be dealing with in the coming years. So it's good to kind of think those things through a bit. Now, additionally, this Uranus is also kind of going to be shaking things up financially and economically on the world stage, but also potentially for us personally. So I would expect expenses that are unusual to arise. Now, this could also go in the other way, where surprisingly, something that you expected to have to put money into, you don't. So this can definitely go either way. This is Uranus, of course. And that's on a personal level, but on a global level, I think we're going to continue to see a lot of fantasy thinking about the economy. And again, it's probably going to be in a lot of different directions, many different people telling us many different things about how things are going to be playing out in the coming years. Again, I would just recommend that we keep our head on a swivel, try to be very aware of what our needs are versus what is, a cherry on top in terms of our lives, and just be ready for whatever kind of comes. But right now, things seem to be spinning up pretty hard in a way that looks unrealistic and will probably need to come down a little bit. But again, as we go up, people, get high on their own supply and they're like, yeah, everything's going to be great. Everything's going to be money. And then it falls because it naturally will. And then people freak out and they think that everything is coming crashing down. There's going to be extremes of how people are interpreting how things are going to be playing out, and try if you can to not worry about things that you can't control during this period of time too. So this can also give us a bit of a sense of the ground underneath us not quite being solid. And I think that that's probably something that a lot of us globally are dealing with during this period of time, as we're kind of watching to see what the next big moves are in the coming years and how that's all going to be playing out between different nations and in different industries and so on and so forth. Now, additionally, one thing that we need to keep in mind with Uranus is that things are rarely as they appear with Uranus. And so things that seem like bad news could definitely wind up being good news, and vice versa, and everything in between. So, what I would very strongly urge along those lines is to understand that things are not as they appear right now, especially financially. So, just try and kind of keep that in mind around this time. Try to, see to your own comfort, your own security, and beyond that, try not to get too sucked into, especially any FOMO in terms of investments. I know that crypto looks like it's going pretty crazy right now, and I'm glad to see that because I got wrapped up in a little bit of FOMO some years ago and I wound up putting some money into those things. But I will say, just because it's like, oh, it's going up. Yeah, it quickly hits a top and then people invest and then it goes down. And then it's a long time until you start to see any sort of growth again. So, you know, if you're feeling FOMO, that's probably not a great indicator that your intuition is telling you to jump in on something. That's more along the lines of the pressure salesman of the little devil on your shoulder, than it is the very strong comfort of, no, this feels really right to me, not based on anything that I've necessarily been told, but just based on how I'm feeling about it. And of course, experts are experts, but there's a lot of people who claim to be experts who are not. So I'll just throw that out there. Now, additionally, there's a lot about the past that is coming through with some of these placements here as well. So memories, reminiscing, nostalgia coming up quite a bit throughout this period of time. But again, we're dealing with Uranus as conjunct that moon. So these things could have a little bit of an ugly tinge to them. And so if you have any triggering memories during this period of time, I would try to see if what you're actually being asked around those based on the transits that we have going on right now is to reframe those experiences such that they are much less triggering, such that they don't reflect to you maybe naivete or gullibility or negativity or anything like this that you feel with regard to yourself in that situation, or necessarily even some of the things that you attach to other people in those situations as well. I think it would be pretty wise to try and reframe those, to try and recontextualize some of those experiences in order to, again, be less hard on yourself and others if they do come up in a way that is a little bit rough with this Uranus conjunct the moon here. And again, so why I'm mentioning this, we have this full moon. The moon is memory. It's right on this Uranus, which is also on Algol, which says some interesting things about scapegoating and consequences and truth and getting wrapped up in one's belief around something and ugly actions to difficult problems, which wind up becoming worse than the original problem was. Things like this all tend to come up with Algol. But additionally, again, this moon is ruled by Venus, which is in Capricorn. Capricorn is past oriented. That Venus is ruled by Saturn, which can be past oriented, but it's also in Pisces, which is it gets lost in its imagination quite a bit. Pisces thinks things through along the way, I have Mercury in Pisces, so this is how Pisces thinks, and it's so ironic that it's coming up right as I'm trying to explain it. But so the way that Pisces processes information is along the lines of the sentiments that it brings up. What are the sensations that one feels with regard to a given situation, and that's part of why the memory along these lines can be very good, because all you need to do in order to remember how something played out, even factually, is attach those facts to the way that one feels about something. But again, it's very sentimentally oriented and also, like sensually oriented. How does something make you feel? So these are, again, very past oriented energies that we're dealing with, while we're also experiencing the final lunation of Pluto in Capricorn, which represents all of the things that we've been dealing with for the past decade and a half, throughout, this whole time. And one thing that's interesting about the way that this full moon is playing out right as Pluto is wrapping up its time in Capricorn is that, you know, through no fault of our own, through simply the way that the market has worked out since Pluto has been in Capricorn, a lot of us have become much, much, much more materially oriented in terms of our values because it seemed necessary, again, to lock down the bottom of the pyramid, having a roof over our head, having food to eat, things like this. And when we get kind of shaken along those lines, as we have been in the past decade and a half or so, yeah, we get kind of materially oriented. And I think that this has certainly served us to some extent, but there is also a level to which it can become too much and overbearing and overemphasized. And I think that that is also in part why many of us have been feeling a lot better in those moments when Pluto has, in the past year or so, dipped into Aquarius here and there, and starting to feel like the energy is just so much lighter, and like we're just dealing with a completely different situation, and we can be a lot less kind of weighed down by what's been, what we've been dealing with for the past decade and a half. So that is also, I think, something, again, this is all going to be kind of presenting itself to us. And depending on how we feel about how things have gone recently, for some of us, it will be coming up in these rougher ways. And so if that arises for you, again, do try to consider that one, there may be a very great lesson in it. What is it that you've learned about that? What is it that you learned from whatever that annoying or difficult experience was, that's arising for you in memory right now? But then additionally, what can you learn now around reframing these things? And what is it about the framing that you already have this in, which you find very upsetting, and which we have to be honest with ourselves? In that case, you would be upsetting yourself with the framing of this memory, so to say. So this is how these kinds of triggers affect us, is because of the way that we think of them, especially. What is it that you can learn about that so that you can be a lot nicer to yourself along those lines, going forward as well? And again, I think a lot of this plays into sustainability going forward. We're going to have to be a lot kinder to ourselves, I think, in the coming years, in order to maintain balance, as not things go terribly wrong or things are so absolutely wonderfully excellent, but just this is going to be a period of transition. The economy is changing, the geopolitical situation is changing, and we're going to be a bit up in the air, and we don't love that. We've also gotten very used to not being okay with being up in the air at all with Pluto in Capricorn recently. And we've also learned to become very reactive and uncomfortable with that, as Uranus has been in Taurus too, where we're kind of trying to grasp onto any sort of security that we can. And again, that's not necessarily bad, but it can lead us to not deal with some of our own emotional needs, our psychological needs. It can have us back burnering those in order to continue to refocus and refocus and refocus specifically on our material security, whereas all of the other types of security are just as important. So I think that it's something that's going to be arising for us as we get these planets, which are in these very fiscally and materially oriented signs of Capricorn and Taurus, into these very socially oriented signs of Aquarius and Gemini here. And then we also get this dreamy, a little bit up in the air, a little bit like, ooh, what do things even really mean? What is truth? Like, what are we dealing with here? Things just being very confusing. And even our own material basis being like, is it there? Is it not there? How are we even doing? When these start coming into Aries, our own relationship with ourself is also going to become critically important. So we're orienting away from these major material questions, and we're orienting much more strongly toward what are these more emotional, psychological, spiritual, collective questions around our social lives and our relationship with ourselves that are going to become very important. And that's why I'm saying I think it's just going to give us the most leeway in order to utilize the Uranian energy that's going to become very sharp in the coming years, as Uranus starts to approach its own planetary north node in Gemini here. So the planetary north node of Uranus is in Gemini, and Uranus is about to come and conjunct that. So Uranus is going to be doing a lot of heavy lifting in the coming years. And as it does so, as long as our basic needs are met, then I think we're just really going to need to have more connection, and to not just continue to, okay, well, I've gotten my footing a little bit better, so let me double down on that. And now I'm doing a little bit better, so let me double down on it even more. So much of our energy has been going into our material standing in recent decades, and I think that we're about to shift away from that. So, definitely the extent to which we can have the wherewithal to do that would be good. Now, additionally, this full moon in particular, we have this across the Taurus Scorpio axis. So questions around body, mind, health, emotional health, psychological health, and also physical health. These are also things that can only serve us well in the coming years. I will say obnoxiously again, if you're feeling up in the air, there are certain things that can kind of never let you down, and those are health and knowing how to be frugal. There's no way that those things that focusing in on those and making sure that those are solid, that those won't serve you, regardless of how things play out. And so these things that we're very much able to control within ourselves, I think are really going to make the biggest difference between who, I hate to say it, who is thriving and who is floundering in the coming decades here. Because it can definitely be very easy to flounder you're just, if you yourself are up in the air and what you're trying to control is social forces during this time, because that's one thing that we're only going to be able to influence within ourselves. We're not going to be able to control other people and how, the broader economy works out. We're only going to be able to control how we contribute to that and what we do with regard to ourselves through that. So additionally, very important, and I will never grow tired of talking about this, the T-square that we have between Mercury in, pardon, Sagittarius, opposite to Jupiter in Gemini, and both of these in a square aspect to Saturn in Pisces here. Saturn's also stationary at the time of this full moon. So this is just such a fascinatingly critical pivot point that we're experiencing around this time. And this is truly asking us to evaluate and reevaluate, consider consequences, get pretty serious about our plans, and creating even a step-by-step plan for ourselves. Again, like I was saying, where you figure out what is it that I really want in the coming years, and how do I strip away as many of the distractions to that, as many of the areas of life where I invest energy, pardon, energy or time or focus or effort into that aren't contributing to that goal for me. Can I strip those away? How can I do that as much as possible? And how can I focus very, very strongly on those specific goals? This lends itself in a very wonderful way to figuring out those steps and sorting all of that out. It's also going to be urging you to do that to a great extent, but here's where it gets a little bit annoying is it will be pointing out where you've yet to think that through. So try to welcome that. That can feel like anxiety. It can feel like, oh man, I have 5 years worth of planning to do. And it's like, not really. Just take the biggest picture, of what it is that you really want. Try to narrow it down into maybe the first and second, maybe the third step there, and just then focus strictly on that first one to start off with, because this can get overwhelming. I've said it before. I will say it many times again. I personally live with a very similar energy to this, and if things are up in the air, I'm kind of, I'm preaching a lot of things that I'm very familiar with personally. Until I have sorted something out, it can feel very anxious. So, if you get those little tinges of a sense of not knowing what it is that you need to be doing, what would be best for you to be doing, right now. Do try and take that broad view that I mentioned and just try and figure out what's the first and second step. And then the things that you need to do in your life. Say if you're wanting to start a business and you have a job, you also have some kids. Obviously, you have to take care of all of those things together, but you might not be as oriented toward worrying so much about deeply developing friendly relationships at work. You might just be focused on doing the work and having that job in order to take care of your family, while what your heart is really in is trying to figure out how do I establish this business. So things like that. Again, these of course can be a little bit anxiety provoking, but if you do feel that come up, again, ask yourself why. And then if it's something along the lines of a plan, do understand that this energy, again, it's very conducive to sorting that out, to figuring out what that plan is going to be. Um, so this would be a good time to take some time out and just sketch that out a little bit. Again, with this Saturn stationing, this is actually quite nice. I really think. I also Saturn and Pisces, from what I've heard from other people and from my own experience of it, it hasn't really been so bad. It really hasn't been the worst. It's, of course, ruled by Jupiter here, which is in Gemini, which is, again, ruled by Mercury. So these are all communicating with each other in a pretty strong way. But even just this on its own, this isn't the harshest Saturn. This is a Saturn that is really going to want to see us figure out what it is that we need for us to go forward in a way that's comfortable. So as it's stationing here, it will probably be offering one, consequences. So of course, we always need to make sure that we're maintaining pretty clean karma, so to say, when Saturn's in Pisces. That's where it's going to kick the hardest. And that's probably why a lot of the people that I interact with haven't really been getting kicked by this too hard, is it's probably that this is impacting in the hardest way people who are trying to outsource questions of maturity onto others and trying to um, offload some of that onto others, even taking advantage of others in order to gain some sense of security, violating boundaries, things like this. That's probably where it's going to be kicking the hardest. And as long as we are not on the jerky side of that, then I don't think that this is really going to be kicking us too hard. It's just going to be trying to get us on a good, solid, stable footing so that we're able to contend with a Saturn in Aries that will kick under most circumstances. Um, so yeah, even though it's a pretty sober, serious time, reprioritizing what's most important going forward is it's gonna pay off extraordinarily well with this T square here. And focusing in again on, how can we make our circumstances most comfortable and sustainable for us individually? Not that we shouldn't consider others, but kind of without focusing too much on those broader kind of collective questions just yet. Right now, we're in planning stages. It's not execution time at all. I would actually say that a lot of the elections that are coming up in terms of launching things are not so great. We're actually really going to want to, and I'm kind of struggling with that because I'm pretty ready to launch a program, but I'm like, man, the timing just doesn't look good. And whenever I, try and kind of inquire in different ways, whether it be tarot or horary or anything, like, hey, should I just buck the timing and just do this anyway? I keep getting, these messages around wait a few months, wait a few months. And that's what a lot of this is looking toward, is we don't really want to carry a whole lot of these outer planets energies with us in terms of what we're actually executing on and launching personally for projects that we want to be carrying on for some years. That may not be the absolute worst, but we would at least want to see very different other aspects going on than are. This looks challenging, like something that needs a lot of revising right now. We're about to go through a Mercury retrograde. We're about to go through a Mars retrograde. A little bit later, a few months from now, actually, we will get a Venus retrograde at the Venus star point in the early degrees of Aries back into Pisces here. So, you know, I'll just kind of throw that out there in terms of timing. This isn't a time to execute. This is a time to think things through, you know. So utilizing the fact that we have this very kind of prescriptive, but then also underlyingly proscriptive T square between Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, this knows exactly what you need to do. If you have a goal, this is going to have all of the answers with regard to that goal for you, but you're going to need to put in the effort with Saturn here to tap into this, you know. But if you do, then it'll definitely pay off. And yeah, I think that also simplifying matters. This is kind of along the lines of what I've been preaching a bit um, throughout this video, but simplifying things, minimalism, things like this, I think are going to serve us quite well going forward for some time as well as being very honest with ourselves about our strengths and our weaknesses, not such that we can beat ourselves up for our weaknesses or even quite yet so that we can fix them or correct for them. But just to be aware of them, I think helps quite a bit, especially if you're aware of your strengths. You know which areas to avoid too much of your own personal investment in. Say, again, if you're trying to launch a business and you are not quite the best at copywriting or something like this, then for you, yeah, AI would help quite a bit because it can do a lot of that. Will it be a little bit more generic probably than someone who's really, really great at copywriting? Yeah, but you probably have strengths that someone who's great at copywriting doesn't have along the lines of, you know, product or whatever it is that you're creating. So focus on those strengths. If you can outsource anything along the lines of your weaknesses, go for it, but just be really honest with yourself about that. Now, additionally, what's kind of interesting about this time coming up is that this moon will come around and it will trine Pluto while it's still in Capricorn. But going forward, Pluto is going to change signs before the sextile to the sun perfects. So that wedge that we had, which was actually playing into a basket, see this basket pattern. We have an opposition between the sun and the moon. And then we have moon and Uranus sextile Neptune, Neptune sextile Pluto, Pluto sextile the sun, of course, in that opposition, and then also trying to Neptune, moon and Uranus trying to Pluto. So as this comes through, we will actually be getting what I like a lot more of a sextile between the sun in Sagittarius and Pluto in Aquarius. So this full moon in and of itself is already not even going to really complete the aspects that it's already making until Pluto moves on. So there's a lot of that Pluto on the cusp of that sign coming through with the specific lunation too. And what's nice about that is, again, I've been speaking about some pretty sober, serious topics about plans and frugality and all of these things. And this is a little bit less oriented toward that. We're going into Sagittarius season. And that's kind of really nice, I think. It's a nice little counterweight to a lot of the big questions and stuff that we've been dealing with in recent weeks. I think as long as you're not ignoring any problems, then there's something pretty interesting here about your ability to laugh things off, to just enjoy the fact that things are cool right now, the fact that we're doing pretty okay, probably on an individual basis. Reorienting yourself toward, again, big questions here around authenticity with the sun in that aspect to Pluto that's not completing until Pluto's in Aquarius and the sun is in Sagittarius, but also the fact that the moon was here with Uranus. And interesting that this aspect perfects right when we get the moon is down here in Leo. So again, these big kind of questions around your own unique path and self and personality and values and desires and motivations and what is genuinely really important to you in terms of your own values. These big questions, I think, are what we're leaning in toward. And that, I think, again, I need to reiterate, I don't think that we are being oriented in this way because of the fact that we're going to be super focused on money in the coming years. It's kind of precisely because I think that we're not. And so, if we're able to answer some of these questions, which we shouldn't be spending a lot of cycles on in the coming years, if we're able to get a grasp on those now, I think that that will serve us well because we're not going to be wanting to think about this going forward. We're going to be wanting to answer these big questions about our own individuality and our own authenticity and things like this. And so if we're able to deal with the serious questions kind of mid-November and so forth, then I think that that leads us into the coming years in a very nice way, where then we're dealing with much more fun and enlivening kind of questions that are coming up for us. Now, additionally, let's get into a little bit of mundane astrology. I won't get too crazy into that on this one, I don't think, but we'll mention it here a bit. So this full moon in particular, in fact, is, let me push that back one. This is on this moon and Uranus here are on the midheaven of Donald Trump and on the midheaven of JD Vance. They are also square, these two, to the ascendants of Trump and of Vance. So Vance has been taking a bit of a back seat. I've noticed in recent days as it's been more along the lines of conversations about nominations and appointments and things like this. So there may be something coming up about them in particular or something that they too are doing that is getting some attention throughout this period of time too, where probably Vance is also highlighted along those lines because it is worth noting that this Uranus in this approximately this degree as it's been hanging out hasn't only been impacting Trump, it has also been simultaneously for sure impacting Vance. And it's been impacting both of them, I do need to point out, again, in ways that defy appearances. So, of course, and this is one thing that I really want to get across about Uranus is there's an assassination attempt that when you think of that, you think, oh no. But I think a lot of us thought at the time, like, oh, okay, well, dude is gonna win then, you know. And then what happened for Vance was that he was suddenly brought up and nominated for vice president, being Trump's running mate. And that's like, oh my gosh, that's incredible. But then he dealt with a lot of people who hate him a lot and getting a lot of really negative attention in those ways. And so now it has turned out for both of them that there is a win in this, certainly along the lines of the fact that they won the election. But again, things are not quite as they appear. So things are going to be complicated coming up. One thing is, I don't think that the fact that there is, with all of these nominations and so forth, it can be easy if you are a progressive person to be like, oh man, like this is going to be a total mess. But what's interesting is that, I mean, these are a bunch of narcissists. I mean, I just have to be completely honest about that. And when you get a lot of them together, yeah, for a while, they stroke each other's egos. They try and kind of suck up to each other for power and so on and so forth. But they can't help but behave in these weird antisocial ways, even to their own detriment. And so, one thing that I definitely think we're going to be seeing because of the fact that the opposition between Mars and Pluto, where I was afraid for that because I was thinking, well, if Kamala wins, that's in a square alignment to both her sun and her moon. So I was worried about violence to her if she had won because of the fact that the electional chart of the election tells us a lot about how things are going to be playing out in the 4 years that are implied by the outcome of that election, right? So this Mars Pluto opposition is embedded in this election, and it's embedded in the nature of what is coming, not only for the country, which is a little bit more along the lines of, that's not so great, but also for the participants. So that's why I was looking at Kamala's chart and I was like, oh, I don't like the way this is aligning for her. But considering the fact that they won and considering the fact that behind the scenes and covert conflict is a major thing that comes along with Mars in opposition to Pluto, yeah, it's going to be palace intrigue. I mean, this is going to be an absolute mess for them. And is it going to be entertaining and fun? Sure, but again, we do have that Mars Pluto opposition that we're also dealing with on a mundane level coming out of that election. So, it's not all, of course, just going to be laughs. There will be some pretty ugly things that come through with policy and so on and so forth that we'll be seeing, and that we will probably react against quite actively, again with that Pluto opposite to Mars. For instance, say if there are major deportations or things like this, probably direct action against that, conflicts, things like that. Yeah, a ton of protests. I mean, the last time that this guy, just even putting aside the astrology, although we can't because that was 2020 and the astrology was crazy, but I mean, we had some of the biggest protests that we've seen in recent decades during the last time that he was in office. So it's going to be on both sides of that, but the point being that, again, Uranus, things are not as they appear. They're not as they seem. And there's always extra levels when it comes to this Uranus. And that's part of why I've kind of grown a little bit fond of this weird little Uranus that's sticking around these degrees. And in every tragedy, there seems to be some interesting silver lining. I mean, even just looking at the transits that I've never seen anything or anyone ever get through before that Israel is going to be experiencing in coming years that are deeply karmic. It's hard to see that situation even as what it appears that it is right now, and that it's going to appear that it is in the coming couple of years. There's more layers underneath that. And specifically, the transit that I'm referring to is that when Pluto comes into Aquarius, it will oppose, yes, the moon, Mars, Saturn, and Pluto of Israel in the coming 20 years. So my view there is that that's not going to last. There's going to be a lot of people leaving. There's going to be only the most extreme remaining for a time. There's going to be a lot of burning through goodwill. There's going to be a huge amount of backlash and this whole project that they're pushing, and that it will probably look like they are succeeding in for some time, because it's going to get so ugly as the more reasonable people flee. Then what is going to be dealt with is the utter unsustainability of it, the utter unbelievably horrible karmic implications of the seeds that have been sown by that situation, and really major blowback uh, along those lines. So again, nothing right now is really as it appears. So if you're thrilled by where we're at, and you're like one of the two people or the 100 billionaires or whatever that's really excited, that's probably bad news for you. But if you are like the rest of us here, then probably things are going to turn out through some more ugliness, no doubt, um, in a much more sustainable and interesting way than it appears right now, and that it's going to appear that the trajectory is going in the coming couple of years. Now, additionally, I will just throw out there, as I'm trying to wrap this up, I always go long. I'm sorry about that. Um, with this mutable T square, also tons of maneuvering, so much maneuvering with this, so much hypocrisy with this, without a doubt. So I would watch out for that for you in particular. So just let's all try and make sure that we're not being hypocritical about things. Now, if you want to be certainly tongue in cheek critical about the way things have shaken out this time versus some other time or whatever, then that I think is always pretty amusing. I will also point out that my mother just told me earlier today about the fact that the Onion has just won the auction for InfoWars, and that their intention of what they want to do is create a parody of InfoWars and host it on InfoWars. And so that is just so hilarious. I'm very, very excited about that. I think that's going to be so funny. And that's the kind of tongue-in-cheek hypocrisy, the parody, the satire. I think that right now is brilliant, especially where it implies some level of consequence. So the consequence of the falsity of the what's his name? Alex Jones. Sorry, I'm hoping I'm not triggering the algorithm right now, but the lies that he told leading to the consequences of this auction, and the settlements that he's having to make, and the fact that a satire parody, you know uh, publication has bought that out and is going to use that to create some humor and some levity out of that, very rough situation that wasn't just for the, kids of that specific shooting, but really of whipping up the politics and young men in this country and other countries and so forth in a very ugly direction, to try and get something, a silver lining out of that through humor, I think is just so beautifully wrapped up in Jupiter and Gemini is just all about laughter. It's all about, you know, okay, yeah, dealing with details, blah, 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 let's get to the fun stuff, let's get to the big stuff. And then Mercury in Sagittarius is also going to be, all about the jokes, all about the levity, all about keeping things light in terms of one's thought processes and things. And then also, again, Saturn in Pisces, the way that you're going to piss off the Saturn, the way you're going to get it to kick you is to be a jerk, is to deserve some karma. So the the seeds that are sown here, and I was picking up um, when I was looking at this T square originally, that there's probably going to be something about consequences of lies within media that will be coming out in a legal way throughout this period of time of this T square. But I assumed that it was related to election reporting, just because that's the way that it looked at that time. But yeah, this is another way that plays out really absolutely beautifully and weirdly just on the nose in terms of the archetypes that we're dealing with there. And this is one of the things that I love so much about astrology is it's like it's telling you ahead of time, like this and this and this. These are the archetypes of what you're going to be dealing with. And of course, these things are, multivalent, as people say. There are many different ways that, for instance, the specific archetype of Mercury and Sagittarius plays out. But if you generally, are able to blend all of these energies together, it will always tell you pretty much right on the nose what's going to be happening. And I just find that absolutely beautiful. Now, additionally, it's just up to us to be able to interpret it correctly, and to not assume it's going to be about the election, but it could also be about the ongoing lawsuit around a media organization due to the lies that it's done. Um, so now, again, part of the reason why I would definitely not be thinking about moving around investments too much right now as well is that we have Mercury has a lot to do with exchanges. Saturn has a lot to do with institutions and long-term growth and things like this, things that take a while to build up. And those are both ruled by Jupiter, which is in detriment currently. So again, I think that a lot of the big, big, big excitement that could lead to some FOMO, I don't think it's as long lasting as it looks like it might be. So try not to feel the FOMO. I'll just say that. Don't be hard on yourself if you're not jumping on what looks like something that's, going to the moon, or so to say. Because I don't think I think that one would have needed to jump in at an earlier time with regard to the things that are going to be picking up specifically right now. So I think that is most of what I wanted to cover here. I'll discuss a little bit more in a future episode, something about the nodes are getting very close to changing their signs. I also would love to address this Saturn stationing a little bit more and possibly even go into Saturn in Pisces more. It's been in Pisces the whole time that this channel has existed, so I haven't really addressed it very strongly, but it going stationary would give me a pretty good excuse to delve into that a bit more like I've been wanting to. So I may do that as well. And yeah, we're going to be having Mars coming up on a retrograde quite soon, this Mercury going retrograde quite soon. So I will be addressing those each in their own video as well. And yeah, other than that, I think that's pretty much what we do need to cover. Oh, one last thing about the full moon specifically is the full moon and Uranus and Algol are rising over Washington, D.C. And what else do we have culminating straight above in the sky but Pluto? So this is yet another lunation that is hitting the angles really, really strongly over Washington, D.C. All of these maneuvers are, of course, having a really big impact globally. And it's almost just a tired story at this point about these full moons and new moons and everything just always occurring on the angles over DC. What's going on again? Things are not as they appear. They are of the utmost importance, sure, but it's such weird energy with the US politics right now. It's not going to shake out the way that it looks like it's shaking out right now. I'll just say that for now, and then we'll go into it more in future videos. But yeah, so that is, I think, pretty much what I wanted to cover for us for now. I hope this wasn't too long for you. Additionally, I do want to point out I have expanded some of the offerings for bookings and including some lower cost options. So if that is something that you've been wanting to do, but maybe just didn't want to spend quite as much, then um, possibly consider looking at those again. Additionally, yeah, there's something that I'm working on. I can't announce it yet because the planets are like, no, not yet. So we'll go into that a little bit more later. Um, but I, I'll just say that there's definitely going to be like coursework and stuff like that involved in the coming months that I'm very, very excited about. And let's see what else. I think that that's most of that. So yeah, I will be seeing you guys again very soon and be good. Bye.